I feel like we made it to this 250 barely by the skin of our frickin' teeth. Certainly democracy is hanging on by a thread. Or maybe, sometimes I wonder, is it that democracy is hanging on by a thread, or is it that social media broke so many things? It broke a lot of the ways in which we genuinely connect with each other. It broke a lot of the ways in which we form relationships, the way that we actually get news. It broke a lot of trust with media. But on the other hand, obviously it also exposed a lot of truth, right? It's not that we didn't know that there was so much violence by police to Black Americans. That was new, but it was so different than seeing it. It's different seeing the way in which protesters are in the streets. It's different seeing the ways in which they are treated. It's different getting like a barrage of politicians being clueless. And so in some weird ways, maybe what's actually happened is just it's exposed a lot of things that were marketing or propaganda. I was like a kid in the 80s, and I was just reading one day, everyone will always been against this, and when he talks about Red Dawn, and I was like, oh my God. I was thinking about all of those 80s propaganda movies. I think he points out in the book, somehow we were both the scrappy person, but also the empire, but really we're the empire. And it's interesting to have this awakening moment and have been raised with this one thing where the enemy is without, and Rocky IV, the Soviets, democracy and freedom. And on the other hand, well, some of that was an illusion. I also feel I've traveled a lot, luckily, in my life, particularly as a young adult. I didn't go anywhere as a kid. Please, where did we go? We went to the Sunset Park pool. But I did study abroad, and I remember that being such a big deal for me because I'd never left the country. And going around Italy at that time, like post-fascist Italy, and going around different parts of Europe, and then eventually Eastern Europe and Latin America and like all these places. And I really sometimes always thought that part of what made us the ugly Americans is we just so took our freedom of speech for granted, that we were so used to taking up a lot of space. And ironically, even though in America, the powerful and elite love to shush people, when we go out, we're always so much louder than other people. But I think it's because, I don't know, I guess to me, there was a sense of freedom. And I think one of the things that's making me down, I'm going to talk about now that I've been really keeping my eyes out, is the way in which that freedom to fluidly say and comment and speak is getting eroded so quickly, and how. But there are some bright spots. The Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship, and I was like texting with a journalist friend who I adore, but she was like, I think it's going to be fine. And I was like, do you? I was nail biting this one. And even that, partly why is because you already saw Brett Kavanaugh, in his opinion, was like, honestly, like everybody else is relying on precedent. And he was like, I'm relying on this law, but Congress could totally take this law up and change the law. The Heritage Foundation was like outraged. Weirdly, Trump was muted. It passed. Obviously, the typical three dissented, and Clarence Thomas, he sees race and sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he says it's important and sometimes he doesn't. It's for now. It's upheld. Anytime the Heritage Foundation decides to get a bee in their bonnet, I always get nervous. It's not the last we'll have seen of any of this, but here we go. And then the other thing that they did that I thought was pretty good, after gutting the Voting Rights Act, basically, they did uphold mail-in ballots, which I think for two reasons it made me feel good. Partly it was that, A, this was like a big thing that Trump was like begging them for and desperately wanted. And B, this is part of the strategy to discount so many of our votes. And so now I think it's, as long as it's by-election day and received within 5 days, those votes are counted. So that's great. That holds. It's a big tool that they did not get in their arsenal, although they won a lot this season. But a thing that really caught my eye and distressed me, frankly, was this last week, they issue out this memorandum, the Supreme Court does, with the cases that they're taking up, the cases that they're not going to hear, and then things that they feel like I want to hear. And Clarence Thomas took up a call to hear Alan Dershowitz's lawsuit against CNN for defamation. Now, This is funny because Clarence Thomas is a reliably accused sexual harasser, and Alan Dershowitz is in the files. But this lawsuit has to do with CNN and things that they said about him and a defamation case. The case hasn't held any water because essentially a precedent called Sullivan versus New York Times. New York Times versus Sullivan is a civil rights era case, and it's essentially one of the biggest protections to freedom of speech that we have in modern history. As a journalist, I know that it protects me from mistakes, just honest, genuine mistakes, so that you can't sue people. But also, this was like a tactic to prevent media from talking too much about things that the powerful didn't want people to talk about, particularly in the civil rights era, because they would sue publications into submission, essentially, in an effort to bankrupt them. And Sullivan versus New York Times was, no, that's not a tactic, and literally we kind of can't do this, and this is freedom of the press, and this is fair game, and you can't just go suing around to silence people, otherwise what's the point? And so I was alarmed by Thomas wanting to take this up, not just because I suspect he's buddies with Grosso and Dershowitz, but partly because of this video that I had seen a few weeks back.
They are coming for Times v. Sullivan, I'm telling you. Times v. Sullivan is like the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court case for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to criticize powerful people. I just got home, or not home, I'm in a hotel in D.C., from an event at like a fancy law firm where we were sitting around a boardroom table having a debate where the guest of honor was this guy, Dr. Carson Holloway, from the University of Nebraska, who just wrote a book called No Liberty to Libel, the constitutional case against Times v. Sullivan, basically arguing that Times v. Sullivan was wrongly decided, was not originalist under the Constitution, and so should be overturned and repealed. He just wrote this book. He's affiliated with right-wing groups like the Claremont Institute, formerly was a fellow or some such at the Heritage Foundation, and he's now written this book, which is just like incredibly dry-sounding, frankly. Like, he's talking about the history of the writing of the First Amendment and the different kind of underlying political theories going at play with Blackstone and Locke, and I don't even know. It was pretty dry, but I'm telling you, this is crucial to keep an eye on, because it's these kinds of books that lay the, intellectual underpinnings that can then be used to argue in court that a decision like this should be overturned, because they're like going back to this dry history that, very few people know and can quote from, arguing that like this isn't what the founders meant.
This young guy went to a think tank presentation, and it was setting the groundwork, and he was like, could see it very clearly. I think they're going to try and take up Sullivan. And as you've seen with this very conservative court, all they keep doing is trying to go back. They're not standing on precedent. In fact, they keep trying to go back and revisiting precedent. To say that it's distressing is maybe an understatement. So the idea that there is a think tank, a conservative think tank, that's now taking up this case, and whether or not that Sullivan versus New York Times should hold any water, we already know think tanks like Heritage Foundation are what gave us Project 2025. And it's distressing to me that they are seeking to now codify the limitation of free speech, particularly with the press. Not that they're not already pretty hard at work doing it. The FCC has already been hitting media so hard. Disney seeming to be the only company willing to fight back, which is interesting because in Woke One, for lack of a better term, I'm going to use Kiyossi's phrase, in Woke One, Disney were the people that were like, yeah, no, we're not doing this in the theme parks, and they got into a big thing with Trump. And then this era, there's been so much corporate capitulation. It's been really interesting to watch them go after Jimmy Kimmel on ABC and The View, and saying that they're not doing equal time with their guests and wanting to have some say in who The View books for guests, and to watch ABC, which is owned by Disney, fight back really hard. The View was running ads on The View, basically saying the government is trying to control what The View does, and for 30 years we've been doing this our way, and what do you have to say about it? Please call the FCC. And all of these people, tens of thousands of people, filed public comment but it was like a hardcore move by ABC to run those ads. And it was a relief to see them fighting back, because it was exactly the opposite of what you are seeing over in the Ellison empire of CBS and the disaster that's CBS News with Barry White and Sendicott and 60 Minutes and that whole thing being decimated, and all because it's owned by Larry Ellison. Isn't just a Trump supporter, he is a Trump patron. Like recently it just came out that he gave over $45 million to Trump supporting organizations in this last election cycle, and then was rewarded with this big AI contract. But beyond the big AI contract, there's the way in which they've turned this blind eye to this giant Paramount merger that the FCC approved last year, and now our only kind of line of defense that's run by his son. We've already seen what they've done with the CBS News takeover, and now this could see them also controlling CNN. And the only line of defense we have to this merger is essentially this collective of attorneys generals that are trying to fight this on the front lines. And I know everybody is calling Congress about so many things, but you should also be calling your attorney generals to tell them to stop this merger. And you'll read a lot in the Hollywood trades about how bad this is for creativity, but I am thinking about how bad this is for free speech, in particular when it comes to this pivotal moment that we're at with AI. And I guess like it brings me to the main thing I wanted to talk about that I am just not seeing people talking about enough. So I'm talking about corporate censorship, and I want to talk about being wrong. Anytime you have to lay out your opinion in public, like I mean, I went to the mat about how I thought Kamala Harris was going to appeal to everybody's better graces, and I was wrong. I was totally wrong. But I also, maybe 3 years ago, wrote a piece about censorship because there was a lot of kind of retaliation going on to artists about their war stances, like anti-genocide stances, essentially. And I admire people that take stands, obviously, but that's not really censorship because only the government can kind of censor you. And I want to admit to a hard fail on that take, because I think I was naive at best, which is to say, at that, even 3 years ago, it's so amazing, like just how rapidly things are changing, but also the way our perceptions are changing, and I'm absolutely included in that. I would say 3 years ago, I really still would have said to you, if you stopped me on the street, like, oh, is America democracy? And I just hadn't been reading the amount of political science that I've been reading in the last few years, and the amount of kind of like just political history. And now I will say, oh God, no, it's not just that we have these oligarchs in tech, like we have fallen into plutocracy. And it's like a heated debate, and it has been for a long time. Like G. William Dunoff, who's a sociologist and wrote this book called Who Rules America, which is like a fascinating, it reads like a conspiracy theory book, but it's like a legit political science text. And like back in like the 60s or 70s, he was, yeah, no, we're a plutocracy. And by that, it just means like the wealthy hold disproportionate political power or influence, like duh. And certainly post Citizens United, that's been really true, but this has been like a slow creep that, again, there is some historical precedent that this was not just, oh, corporations got more power and then there was Citizens United. There's some historical precedent that after what was called, so there's the Gilded Age, there was like a lot more income tax. After that, that was how the Gilded Age ended, was that there was so much political violence and unrest like in the streets. Like you had the Tulsa massacre, you had this giant union battle that turned into a government insurgency in 1921, and like everybody that was elite was watching what was going on in Soviet Russia, and they were kind of like, we got to get this under control. And so they started allowing unionization, there was like control of the workday, and then eventually we got income taxes, and then those taxes kept getting higher and higher into the 60s, and the corporate tax rate was like pretty phenomenal. Like when America was great, the corporate tax rate was very high. And I say all this to say that right around this time, there was, again, a movement that sort of started in a think tank that made its way, like white papers and that kind of thing, to take over more corporate control of the government.
There's a document in this country that most people outside of policy circles have never read. It's not classified, it's not hidden. It's an 8-page memo written by a corporate lawyer in Virginia in the summer of 1971. And that memo is the single most important document in modern American politics, because almost every political shift that you've lived through, Citizens United, the Federalist Society, the capture of the Supreme Court, The collapse of labor unions, corporate money in every election, was sketched out on 8 pages by one man. It's called the Powell Memo. And once you know it exists, prepare to be uncomfortable.
You started to see the forces that be become more lobbying groups, like big corporate conglomerate lobbying groups, groups of companies, groups of CEOs, like lobbying for lower taxes and this and that. And what ended up happening is over that time, a lot of political scientists started to say, all right, this is becoming plutocratic. And then you had other people that were like, no, we're still a democracy. And now I think what you're seeing is globally and domestically, the Harvard Kennedy School, like people are like, yeah, we've got a plutocracy problem in America. And when I was researching my book, like I certainly talked to a couple of people that were like, yeah, it's a plutocracy. And because of that, I've started thinking about censorship in a really different way, because you see companies putting a chokehold on speech and monitoring people. You're watching Meta and they're saying they're training AI, but they're also watching what people are saying and doing. And this is chilling to me, because now if you're not just worried about censorship creeping into the government, but you're worried about censorship creeping into other spheres of public life, which brings me to this thing that I just can't believe more people aren't talking about, which is Luca Guadagnino and this movie that he was making, that he made, that maybe we'll see, I hope we'll get to see, called Artificial. Luca Guadagnino is a superstar. Given how hard it is to make movies in Hollywood, he has been making them at a clip. He made Call Me By Your Name, which gave the world Timothée Chalamet. It seemed for better, and maybe it's for worse, I don't know. And he did Challengers, which is a huge hit, queer filmmaker. And so not surprisingly, he took an interest in queer AI mogul Sam Altman. And I heard about this, oh my God, Andrew Garfield was gonna play Sam Altman. And I got really excited about this, A, for his take, but B, because I had seen, at first I saw the video and then I read Ronan Farrow's in-depth profile of Sam Altman, and it was terrifying to say the least.
For the past year and a half, I've been digging into one of the biggest unresolved mysteries in the AI industry. Sam Altman, why he was fired from OpenAI in an episode that's never been fully explained, and whether questions about his integrity that have followed him across his career are really something we should worry about. I obtained hundreds of pages of previously undisclosed and in some cases closely guarded documents. I also interviewed more than 100 people with firsthand knowledge of how Altman conducts business. Current and former OpenAI employees and board members, guests and staffers at Altman's various houses, his colleagues, competitors, friends, and enemies. And of course, Sam Altman himself, whom I spoke with more than a dozen times. Another of Altman's colleagues, leading up to his firing, said, quote, "I don't think Sam is the guy who should have his finger on the button. Take a look and decide for yourself."
But I also felt The Social Network, which came out in 2010, in hindsight, I think might be one of the most important pieces of modern cinema. And I say that because it took this critical look. Up until that movie kind of came out, there were like rumors about Mark Zuckerberg being strange or Mark Zuckerberg being mean or a jerk and the Winklevosses and all of this stuff. But he was mainly lauded as a corporate genius, right? This boy wonder, and look at what he did and look at what he built, and this is amazing. And you get The Social Network and it takes this kind of critical look at this person and their character and makes you realize, oh my God, we have all been immersed in the digital world made by somebody of really flawed character and soul and intent, and that it was started with kind of malicious intent, and there's dubious ethics involved here all around, and everyone involved in this project is not a person that you'd ever want to do personal business with, and yet we've been giving them everything. And what it did, in my opinion, is that movie laid the groundwork such that when we then heard about election interference and cooperation with all of these outside forces, and later on when you get Careless People, which is an amazing book, amazing audiobook if you haven't read it, and you hear about what they were doing to push into China and boundaries that they're pushing with governments and rules that they're bending and looking the other way and taking information they couldn't, you ended up believing all of it because you had seen The Social Network, and even though you know it's a fictitious biopic, you're like, It felt like it could be true. It's based on real lawsuits. There's depositions. There's actual public information that backs up a decent number of these stories. And it really reframed not just Mark Zuckerberg, but it reframed social media and this world and the people in it and what kinds of people these are and who have we now given up our lives to. And I think it sowed the seed over time, and particularly the 2016 election, I think only hastened this, but of people being like, what are we doing over here? And now you're seeing that really grow with kids trying to get themselves offline and governments looking into, should we all be online? I think I just was reading about a state that now has a warning that pops up every time you open a social media app, letting you know that it might damage your mental health. Like, there's been a real movement to say maybe we adopted all of this too quickly. And I really think it's one of these instances where even though art of film, this particular film is fiction, it shifted the way in which the landscape perceived social media and tech moguls, and it opened our eyes up to the possibility that maybe this isn't all just about catching up with Granny, and maybe there's some more nefarious intent at play. So I was OpenAI, Sam Altman. This is feels like an important person in the cultural landscape to get a critical view of, or at least a dramatic view of, and I could see why Luca Guadagnino is so intrigued by him. It's like this openly gay, married man, that is now dominating the way in which he's talking about how much energy it costs to raise a human. I could see why this is an interesting subject to Luca Guadagnino. Gets $40 million from Amazon to make this movie. Obviously, he's got Andrew Garfield. He's got this amazing track record, and the movie's almost done. And Amazon enters into a $50 million OpenAI partnership. Jeff Bezos is friends with Sam Altman, and the next thing you know, they pull the plug on the movie. There is no more artificial. Will you see this movie? I don't know, because weeks go by and Luca Guadagnino is shopping this thing around. Amazon's like, it doesn't make sense. The Hollywood Reporter is, nobody wants it because everybody's afraid of the politics. Apparently, it looks like it landed at Neon, the distributor Neon, who's made some amazing movies, but it was by the skin of its teeth. And speaking to the Italian press, Luca Guadagnino said, what matters most to me are the people. It's completely changing the face, not just of society in terms of consumption and how we relate to these tools, but the very face of the identity of a place like the United States and the entire world, with the rise of this small oligarchy that wields truly radical control. Luca Guadagnino is basically, I am being censored. I cannot make these films. And now you then see Netflix partners with Ben Affleck's AI company, which is putting so many jobs in jeopardy. You see then A24 faced all this backlash. Riding off the non-AI success of Backrooms faces all this backlash because they go into a giant partnership with DeepMind from Google. And you're like, are we going to be able to critique AI? Are we going to be able to critique government with our art? Are we going to be able to take a critical look at anything? This is all interesting because in the meantime, Sony Pictures is currently, 2 weeks ago, I think, they released the trailer for the sequel to The Social Network that should be coming out later this year.
That power. I'm a free speech absolutist. I'm not the one who's lying, and I'm not stopping them from seeing someone who is.
It looks fascinating. It's about a whistleblower, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see how that rollout goes. I noticed that on Instagram, it was hard to find clips. You can find the trailer on YouTube. It was a little harder on a Meta platform to find it, and let's just see how that rollout goes. At least it's happening, but I think the bigger thing to me is, what does it mean if these oligarchs are able to pull the plug on something, push out propaganda like the Amazon-backed Melania doc? This not just mean for our own free speech, which is clearly under threat in the government sector, but what does it mean in terms of what we then are getting access to in terms of art and art making and popular culture that rely on these distribution platforms that are owned by these oligarchs? And then it begs the bigger and maybe more terrifying question, what do these oligarchs want? And I have to tell you, I did my TED Talk, and my TED Talk was about democracy and oligarchs and income inequality. And essentially, in general, intense amounts of wealth do lead people to having a propensity towards autocracy, towards dictatorship, towards all the sort of non-democratic modes of governing that particularly reward patronage and monopolies and turning a blind eye to things and people who live above the law, like all of that. And I talked about this in my TED Talk, and afterwards, a bunch of people came up to me and they were like, what do you know about Curtis Yarvin? And I was like, I don't know anything about Curtis Yarvin. I never even heard of Curtis Yarvin. And a few people directed me to this podcast, Behind the Bastards, if you're a podcast person. If you are not a podcast person, and honestly, it's just a really well-written piece in The New Yorker from 2025, this profile on Curtis Yarvin. And it is bone-chilling, honestly bone-chilling. And so the whole reason why everybody was coming up to me is because this is the man who has the ear of Peter Thiel, who backed, obviously, J.D. Vance's political climb, who has the ear of many people in government. And honestly, Curtis Yarvin has the ear now of tons of tech bros and has been parroted, his talking points have been parroted by J.D. Vance, who is the Vice President of the United States. And Curtis Yarvin, I'm sad to say, also went to Brown, but he was, it seems, a deeply unpopular baby genius who became a monarchist. And he believes, if not quite in a monarchy, a contemporary monarchy, where we are run in a feudal society of almost CEOs, and where corporations essentially pull the levers of government, and where you have, rather than a president, you have essentially a CEO in chief who is meeting with boards of directors who are the CEOs of our companies, and we all just become little cogs in the corporate machine. In fact, at one point in this profile, they talk about some of Curtis Yarvin's musings that he wrote about on his blog and all these other things, and how he talks about how perhaps we should turn homeless people into fuel rather than have to deal with this problem. So to say that he is preaching anti-humanity is an understatement, but more than anything, what is chilling about this article written in 2025 is then how many things you can see that Curtis Yarvin advocates for that have started to become wheels in motion, and that you can hear this tech oligarchy and their mouthpiece, J.D. Vance, talking about in public. And it has me scared, I'm not gonna lie. And it doesn't just have me frightened for what it is, but there is some ample evidence to say that the wheels are absolutely in motion.
I have been researching one of the weirdest stories that I've ever looked into. It's about a once fringe movement among the tech elite that aims to replace governments entirely with corporations. Privatized societies run by CEOs, built for profit, not for people. Almost like they wanted their own little worlds, playlands, built just for them based on their desires. I eventually pulled away from the story because it seemed a little more silly than anything to be concerned about. But then I realized they might already be getting their way. Just look at Doge and Palantir replacing or breaking the basics of the government. The plans for a futuristic, privatized new Gaza. AI infrastructure growth that seems immune to public opinion, and invasions of countries seemingly at random.
A new power structure in society that will overcome the existing democratic power structures. When billionaires suddenly have a tremendous amount of power and democracy has been proven to be exceedingly vulnerable.
So I decided to dig back in. What is this movement? Where did it come from? How did the people involved get so powerful? Where is it going? And importantly, what can we do to stop it?
I found this one piece a little chilling because it's parroting a lot of Curtis Yarvin. And you then see centrist Democrats, or as people have started calling them online, corporate Democrats, talking about, oh my God, we're going to take this capitalism pledge, and the DSA is running amok, and we are not socialists.
There are certain things that I believe in that are not being reflected in the current environment, especially with some of these races on Tuesday. And as we said in our pledge, we're for capitalism, not socialism. We're for safety, not lawlessness. We're proud of America, not ashamed of America. And we need to be promoting those things. And the far left and the far right, they're all very well organized. But those of us that don't support those far left or far right principles need to do a better job organizing and getting our message out.
And I think what's really crazy is like, how many elected representatives do we have? There are hundreds serving at the national level, elected representatives. Since all of these centrist corporate Democrats are so beholden to donor interest and corporate donor interest, they should honestly be looking at these DSA candidates like they're doing them a friggin' favor, because they will allow them to keep a moral spine and not sell us out completely to a bunch of corporate monarchists, essentially. You could just shift the blame to them and be like, oh, there's this faction and now we can't get this thing passed. Oh, there's this faction and now... They should be using the DSA as a tool to uphold the moral right of America and uphold democracy. Right now, I think we should be leaning less on the socialist part of DSA and more on the fact that it's a democratic socialist of America. And I say this to say there's so many, particularly Latinos, who have fled socialist-leaning countries that are terrified of the idea of anybody that says anything socialist, when in fact there's so many socialist programs that already have been a backbone for America. Unemployment insurance, Medicaid, Medicare. We already have socialism running in our democracy, and we might need the inoculation of some good socialist policy right now to actually take us away from this plutocracy that we've fallen into, and this oligarchy, and this sort of direction towards corporate monarchy that clearly our oligarchs want to take us in, and pull us back towards an actual democracy, the democracy that we were meant to be. And I guess call me a sucker, but I'm still a weird patriot. I still believe in the promise of what this country could be. If I know it was never designed for us, but I still believe that we could fight to make it win. Anyway, what we don't need is a pledge for capitalism. I think this is like the stupidest thing ever. You're gonna now basically, don't worry, corporations, I won't betray you, because we're not living in a time where we're talking about, when you say pro-capitalism, you're talking about small business. What small business is thriving in America? I was a small business owner for years, and I opened that business in 2003, and I don't even know how we could bootstrap a business the way that we did that ends up sustaining 2 adults full-time, 2.5 sometimes, 3 people sometimes, and all of these part-time employees over a course of years. We could never do that now. We would need so much more capital. And I just want to say, like, when people talk about, oh, we're taking a pledge for capitalism, they're really taking a pledge for corporations, the way it looks right now. And they should be, honestly, like the DSA, just last night, a DSA candidate in Colorado won. She's 30, and I think she had seated somebody who's been in Congress for 29 years. People are saying we want change and this government isn't working for us, and it's a lot of young people saying that, but it's a lot of other people too. A lot of older people voted for Mamdani, and rather than being frightened, we should see this influx of DSA as the course correction we need, because we are not in a healthy democracy at all. We have run adrift into corporate plutocracy. There is clearly an intent and a desire to take us towards corporate monarchy, which I never even thought I'd be letting these words come out of my mouth, but there seems ample enough evidence of the thinking around this that it frightens me. Anyway, I leave you on the anniversary of our nation with our vice president, and may a love like this never ever find me.
That's right. Today's special reader is my husband, Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. Thanks for joining us today, honey.
Of course. Good to see you.